Hello there. Welcome to the Light Story Club. Settle in and find a comfy spot to relax. Before we get to the story, I would love to know your favorite myths and monsters. Comment where in the world you are and let's begin the story. The first thing I remember was warmth, not the sun, for I had never seen it, but a warmth that pulsed through the mossy cradle I was born in. My name is Lysiri, though I didn't hear it until the third moon of my life, when the wind first spoke it to me through the song of the leaves. I was small, even for a fairy, barely the size of a forest toadstool. My wings, then, were delicate translucent threads, still furled tightly to my back like the petals of an unopened bloom. The Glimmer Grove, where I was born, existed in a fold of the world hidden beneath willow roots and woven into the memory of starlight. It is said that fairies are born from light that touches dew just before dawn, and perhaps that is true, for I always felt closest to myself in the cool hush of morning. My earliest days were quiet, filled with the scent of pine and lilac and the endless, whispering comfort of the forest. Elder fairies would pass by, drifting like soft sparks between the branches, leaving behind trails of songdust and laughter. I admired them from my mossy perch, uncertain if I was truly one of them. My magic had not yet awakened. I could not glow, could not hover, and my voice was more squeak than song. Still, I was content. My world was the shade of ferns and the curve of mushroom rings, and I had the company of beetles and breeze to pass the time. On the seventh night, a gathering took place. It was the moonfall, when the great silver lily at the heart of the grove opened its petals to drink in the starlight, pulsing softly with each breath of the sky. I was led there by Marilyn, an elder with wings like folded clouds and a voice as slow and sweet as sap. She did not speak much, but she smiled with her whole being. When we arrived at the lily, hundreds of fairies floated in the air, their lights twinkling like scattered constellations. It was then I saw her. Nearer, a fairy no older than myself, with hair like woven ivy and eyes that gleamed like water in motion. We stood beside each other in silence, two fledglings among stars. The lily bloomed fully, wide and glowing, and a hum filled the grove, not a sound, but something deeper, something felt in the bones of the leaves and the silence of the stones. And in that moment, I felt my wings unfurl, aching and unsure, but mine. They glimmered faintly, not with the golden shimmer of the elders, but with a soft blue-green luminescence, like moonlight on shallow water. Neera looked at me, her eyes wide with the same amazement I felt. She reached for my hand, and I did the same. Our fingers brushed, and in that tiny spark of contact, I felt the first flicker of magic inside me, a ripple of energy that danced from fingertip to wingtip. We didn't speak. We didn't have to. That night we sat under the petals of the great lily, letting its silver light soak into our skin. The days after moonfall were different. I could feel the forest in a new way, as if it breathed with me. When the wind touched the back of my neck, I heard faint laughter. When I placed my hands on the bark of the ancient elm, I could feel a slow, steady heartbeat. I began to practice fluttering, guided by Marilyn and encouraged by Neera. My wings, though still small, began to hold me in the air for seconds at a time. The ground no longer held me captive. One morning, I awoke to find a tiny glow beside me. It pulsed in rhythm with my breath. I cupped it in my palms and felt it rise, a wisp of raw magic, no bigger than a firefly. "Your first spell," Marilyn said, appearing from the mist with her usual gentleness. It chose to form as light. You are a weaver. A weaver. The word danced in my thoughts. Every fairy had a calling. Some shaped weather. Some coaxed seeds into bloom. Some sang the thoughts of animals into poetry. And I could pull threads of light from the fabric of the world. My hands trembled with possibility. Neera's magic had awakened too, though hers was more chaotic. Sparks popped from her fingertips, and sometimes her presence made flowers bloom far too early. She was a shaper, and the trees would often lean toward her as she passed, as if eager to be changed. We practiced together, often failing, often laughing. When we weren't training, we explored. We discovered a stream that giggled when tickled by shadows and a stone circle that told stories in whispers when touched at twilight. The forest, I began to realize, wasn't just alive, it was aware. It remembered those who lived in harmony with it. The stones beneath my feet knew my steps. The moss learned my weight. The trees bent to shelter us from storm and heat. At times, I could almost hear them think. But not all in the Glimmer Grove was gentle. One dusk, while chasing a foxfly trail with Neera, we strayed beyond the ring of the elder trees into the bramble dark. The air there changed, thicker, heavier, and filled with a silence that pressed on the skin. No birds called. No leaves rustled. The trees there were crooked, and their bark wept sap as dark as ink. Neera and I stopped, suddenly afraid. Something moved between the shadows, tall and slow. A whisper brushed my thoughts, not words, but the taste of rot and regret. We fled, my wings catching wind for the longest time yet, and didn't stop until we reached the silver lily's glow. Marilyn was waiting, her face grave. "Do not go beyond the elder ring," she said simply. "Not until your wings are ready to carry you home, even from the deepest dark." That night I lay awake, not from fear, but from the realization that there was more to this world than light and laughter. There were secrets hidden beneath the roots, stories swallowed by time, and beings who watched from behind the bark. I understood then that growing was not just becoming stronger or more magical, it was learning to carry wonder and fear in the same heart. I was no longer only a listener to the songs of the grove. I was beginning to hum my own melody, and the forest, ever ancient, was listening back. After the first moonfall and the touch of awakening magic, everything in the Glimmer Grove seemed to vibrate with deeper meaning. It was not that the world had changed, but that I had. My eyes, once content with soft greens and browns, began to find glints of color in shadows, threads of blue in twilight, and spirals of gold in the flutter of dragonfly wings. I would spend mornings watching the dew settle on spider silk and trace the patterns it made, learning how light danced through the smallest lines. I had not known it then, but this too was weaving a way of seeing, of following the hidden currents that tied all things together. Marilyn began to teach me in earnest. Weaving is not about creating, she told me one morning as we sat on a flat stone warmed by dawn. It is about listening. Light is already telling stories. Your task is to catch those stories before they vanish. She passed her hand over the stone, and a thin strand of light curled from her fingertips like smoke. It shimmered, then settled in the air, suspended. With a flick of her wrist, it spiraled into a shape, a moth in mid-flight, wings caught forever in a beat. It pulsed once, then drifted apart into sparkles. I practiced daily. My first weavings were messy, more tangled thread than shape. But slowly, The threads began to obey me. I could pull light from the air, bend it gently into soft spirals, even shape small forms, blossoms, shells, the silhouette of a bird. The forest helped me. Whenever I wove near the ancient stones or under the watchful gaze of the old oaks, the threads responded more quickly. It was as if the glimmer grove was lending me its memory. Nira's progress was different. Her shaping magic was more wild, more visceral. Where I coaxed patterns, she pulled growth from the ground with sudden bursts. I once watched her sing to a stump and see it blossom into a spiral of mushrooms, each glowing faintly with bioluminescence. She was fearless, throwing herself into her learning with the kind of fierce joy that made my heart ache with admiration. We balanced each other, my caution with her daring, my patience with her spark. Together, we began to wander further. Never again into the bramble dark, not yet, but to the edge of the mist pools, where frogs sang in harmonies and the air smelled like distant rain. One evening, as the sky turned lavender and the first stars blinked awake, we discovered an old, crumbled ruin wrapped in ivy and moonflower vines. The stones were carved with runes none of us could read, and moss had softened their once sharp edges. We stepped carefully through the broken archway, our feet echoing faintly. The air inside was still and thick with silence, but it did not feel dangerous, only forgotten. In the center of the ruin was a stone pedestal. On it lay a single, crystal feather, no larger than my hand. I reached toward it and felt a pull, not physical, but something deep within me humming in resonance. When my fingers brushed the feather, light rushed up my arm, not burning but searing with truth. I saw glimpses. A great winged creature diving through storm clouds, a forest set aflame, the crying of something that had no voice. Then it faded, and the feather turned to ash in my palm. I staggered back. Nira caught me, her eyes wide with worry. "What was it?" she whispered. I shook my head, unable to answer. Marilyn said later that night, when we told her, some memories live in objects long after their owners are gone. You found a ghost of a story. Be careful, some stories cling like burrs. But something had changed in me. Ever since that moment, my weaving grew sharper, clearer. I could spin forms that didn't vanish, structures that hovered in place even after I left them. I had begun to tug not just on light, but on memory. As weeks passed, the seasons began to shift. Summer ripened slowly into late golden days, the air heavy with bee song and the scent of ripe elderberries. The forest was full of whispers, of changes only the oldest trees could predict. The elders grew more watchful. Gatherings became more frequent. The glimmer grove was stirring. We could all feel it. One morning, I awoke with my wings humming, not buzzing or aching, but vibrating gently, as if answering a call I could not yet hear. I stepped outside and found the trees all leaning slightly eastward, their shadows cast longer than they should have been. The equinox approaches, Marilyn said when I found her, perched high in the lattice of a moon vine. And with it, the test. The test? I asked, my voice suddenly small. She looked at me and nodded slowly. Each fairy must pass it. When the forest decides you are ready, it will lead you. The shape of the test is never the same, for it reflects the heart of the fairy who walks it. I told Nira, and she squeezed my hand. We'll face it together, she said, though we both knew the truth. The forest would not let us walk the same path. That night, I could not sleep. The air was too still. The stars seemed to watch me more closely than usual. I lay among the roots of my nest tree, listening to the hush of leaves. Then, just as my eyes began to close, I heard it, a thread of sound, impossibly faint, like a harp played from beneath the earth. It wound through the night and tugged gently at my magic. I stood, following it. My feet moved without thought. Deeper into the trees I went, beyond the shimmer of known paths, through brambles that parted for me and under branches that bent low with knowing silence. And then I was there, at the edge of a glade I'd never seen before. The moon bathed it in soft silver, and in its center stood a tree I could not name. Its bark was dark as velvet, and its leaves shimmered with shifting colors. Hanging from its branches were threads, thousands of them, each catching moonlight in a different way. Some were pale and soft, others bright and burning. I stepped closer. My wings buzzed with anticipation. A voice, not mine, echoed softly in my thoughts. Choose a thread. Weave your truth. I reached up, hand trembling, and took hold of a single, silver blue thread. As I touched it, it clung to my fingertips, and I began to pull. It was heavy, full of stories not yet told. I closed my eyes and began to weave. My hands moved on their own, shaping images. My first flight, Neera's laughter, the touch of the crystal feather, the fear in the bramble dark, the warmth of Marilyn's smile. The thread responded, glowing brighter with each memory, each emotion. When I opened my eyes, the thread had become a tapestry, a floating shape that pulsed with life. I let it rise. The tree shimmered. Its leaves rustled once, like applause. Then all the other threads vanished, leaving mine alone in the glade. The voice returned. You have woven your first truth. You may return. I stumbled home at dawn, my wings aching, but I was not the same. I had faced the test. I had found the thread of my heart and followed it through shadow and silence. Marilyn smiled when I returned, and said only, "Good." Neera met me later, her own eyes wide with wonder. I heard the wind calling, she whispered. "It's my turn now." And as she vanished into the trees, I whispered after her, "Find your truth." The Glimmer Grove had begun to change us. And in return, we were changing it. When Neera returned, the sky was dark. Not with storm clouds, but with something older, heavier, an echo of memory in the wind. Her hair was damp, her wings flecked with dirt, and there was a shadow behind her eyes that had never been there before. She said nothing at first, only sat beside me on the edge of the elder spring, her legs dangling over the roots like they always had. I waited. Eventually, she whispered, "It wasn't a tree. Mine was a pool." I turned, but she didn't meet my gaze. I looked into the water, and it looked back. And it showed me, her voice drifted off. I touched her hand gently. She gripped mine. It showed me what I could become if I lost control. Her fingers trembled. It showed me the ruin I could make if I stopped listening. I didn't ask what she had seen. I only said, "But you came back." She nodded. Barely. The Glimmer Grove had given her a harder truth than mine. I had woven from light and memory. She had peered into the deep root of her own power, and found both fire and fear. In the days that followed, she grew quieter, not diminished but more measured, like a flame that had learned to flicker slowly instead of leap. Her shaping grew gentler, more deliberate. She no longer summoned bursts of growth for fun. She would kneel beside a sprout and whisper to it for hours, coaxing it upward with kindness instead of command. The elders began to watch us differently. There was approval in their silence, and something else, expectation. We had passed the first rites of growth. But there was always another layer, another song beneath the leaves. And the forest had started humming. Marilyn gathered us together beneath the twin oaks that marked the heart of the grove. The canopy above shifted softly, letting filtered gold spill onto her shoulders. "You are no longer fledglings," she said. "You are chosen now by the grove. And it is time you learn why the Glimmer Grove was hidden." She took us deeper than we'd ever gone, past the hollows of the fireflies, through a twisting tunnel of brambles that only bent for her touch. At the end lay a small clearing. At its center was a stump, old and scorched black, surrounded by stones etched with glyphs I could barely look at. The air hummed, and my magic recoiled slightly. "This," Marilyn said softly, "was once the center of our world. Until it was wounded." She touched the stump, and it pulsed faintly. Long ago, something was drawn here, something ancient and lost. It tried to shape the forest without listening, tried to twist the songs of light and root to its own hunger. It burned from the inside, and the grove bled. "This clearing is what remains." I shivered. Nira stood still beside me. "You must understand," Marilyn continued, "that magic is not a rite. It is a conversation. One we must never stop listening to." She looked at us, not with fear, but with deep calm. "You will be stewards of this place one day. The Glimmer Grove remembers. And it chooses those who can help it heal." We spent that evening in quiet. Even the insects seemed hushed, as if paying respects to an old wound. I found myself thinking back to the ruined feather, the flashes of storm and sorrow. I had not fully understood them then. But now, I began to see the pattern. Magic out of balance scorched even the soil it touched. It wasn't evil, not exactly, it was dissonance, a forgetting of the harmony that held all things together. That night, in the half-sleep between dreams, I saw threads stretching out around me, every leaf, every stone, every beetle and root, all tied by glowing strands. And I was in the middle, not as a spider or master, but as part of the weave. My fingers moved, adjusting a knot here, tightening a loop there. When I woke, I remembered the pattern. I went outside and, without thinking, pulled light and memory together into a new weaving, a protective one, shaped like the brambles around the wound clearing. It shimmered briefly, then faded, but not entirely. Something lingered in the air. Nira joined me, and without words, added her own piece, a tendril of growth shaped like a spiral, anchored to the earth. We looked at each other. No instruction, no elder guidance. We had simply responded. That day marked the beginning of our new learning. No longer were we taught in lessons. We were expected to listen for what needed to be done. Sometimes that meant weaving spells into the roots to ease their ache. Sometimes it meant watching birds fall silent and following the hush until we found a broken stone or an old echo of pain. We worked in quiet, and the forest whispered back. But not all was peace. One twilight, a tremor moved through the grove, not of earth, but of silence. It rippled through the wind, and every flower closed at once. We gathered at the Silver Lily. The elder fairies stood tense. Marilyn's voice was tight. "The boundary frayed," she said. "The bramble dark has stirred." I felt it too, that faint, cold memory pressing in. That strange regret that seemed to breathe in the shadows. We weren't sent to investigate. We were told to stay close, to wait. But Nira could not sit still. She was flame even now, even after her test. I knew what she was thinking before she said it. What if something broke through? She whispered. What if something needs help? I tried to stop her. She didn't listen. So I followed. We slipped past the elder roots, past the paths we were meant to know, back toward that place where the trees cried ink. This time, we were stronger. Our wings didn't falter. Our magic hummed like a net ready to be cast. But the air was worse than before. Heavier. Not evil, empty. Like a place where stories had stopped. We moved slowly, fingers touching the ground now and then to stay grounded in light. And then we saw it, a clearing blackened at the edges, where no light fell. And at its center, a figure. Not a fairy. Not quite a creature. It was shaped like a child, but hollow, its eyes dark wells, its skin made of bark stripped of color. It didn't move. It just stood there, breathing softly, looking up at nothing. Nira stepped forward. I grabbed her wrist. She whispered, "It's not attacking. It's not wrong. It's lost." She knelt, and I crouched beside her, uncertain. The thing tilted its head. Something in its chest pulsed faintly blue, like my own threads. Without thinking, I reached for it, not to bind, but to listen. My magic extended like a root in search of water. And then, like a sudden gust through the canopy, I heard it, a lullaby, broken and looping, the memory of a cradle song sung long ago. The creature blinked. Its eyes flickered faintly. Not human. Not fairy. Not forest. But once it had been something kind. Nira reached forward and sang. Just one line, a soft echo of the lullaby. I added a thread of light, weaving it gently through the song. The clearing warmed slightly. The figure stepped back, turned, and vanished into the trees. No explosion, no burst of shadow. Just silence, then birdsong. The forest exhaled. We returned shaken, but unharmed. Marilyn did not scold us. She only listened. And when we finished, she touched our shoulders and said, "Then something wounded has been heard. That is the first step of healing." I fell asleep that night knowing we were no longer apprentices. Not really. We were listeners now. Menders. Part of the weave. The days that followed our encounter with the hollow figure passed in a quieter rhythm, though it was the kind of quiet that settles after something profound, full of thought, laced with echoes. The Glimmer Grove was different now, or perhaps we were the ones who had changed. The birds still sang and the brooks still chuckled over stone, but I noticed how the wind seemed to curve around certain glades, how the roots of the oldest trees no longer grew in straight lines, but in gentle, deliberate spirals, almost as if shielding something beneath. The forest was responding, shifting, adapting, listening. Nira and I spent more time apart than we once had. Not in estrangement, but in quiet understanding. There were paths she had begun to walk that I could not follow, not because I wasn't allowed, but because they weren't mine. Her shaping was turning inward, her growth slower, deeper. She spent long hours with the stone circles near the old mushroom groves, humming to herself and placing seeds in patterns that I did not recognize. I, meanwhile, had begun to hear the weave more clearly. Where once I had to close my eyes and concentrate, now the threads whispered to me even as I walked. One dusk, I was drawn to the eastern slope, where mist pooled like milk and the trees grew low and bent. There, I found an old standing stone, half buried beneath moss, with the faintest glimmer of silver lines curling across its surface. I brushed the moss away and the lines flared to life, pulsing softly in response to my touch. It was not dangerous. It was lonely. When I pressed both palms to its side, I heard a voice, not spoken aloud, but deep, vast, ancient. Not a voice made of syllables, but of memory. It was the voice of the stone itself, and it said, "Remember us." In the vision that followed, I saw a gathering, a circle of fae not unlike myself, but older in posture and presence, draped in glows of many colors, wings unfurled like banners of light. They stood around a great tree with leaves of glass and whispered songs into the soil. And then came the fire, not wild, not born of rage, but sorrow. A light turned inward and poisoned, and when it passed, all that remained were stones and shadows. I awoke beside the stone, my hands warm, my eyes wet. I went to Marilyn. She listened as always, never interrupting, her eyes reflecting the candlelight like pools of still water. When I finished, she said, "The Glimmer Grove remembers in layers. We who weave must listen not only to what is, but to what was. That stone you touched is part of the deep roots. Before the grove, there was a forest of light. You have seen its ashes." I asked her if it would return. She shook her head. "Not as it was, but perhaps through you, through all of us, something new may grow with its memory inside." That night I dreamed of the tree again, the one with the glass leaves. But this time, I walked through its branches, not as a visitor but as a thread, part of its shape. I followed its limbs until I reached the highest point, and there, nestled between two stars, was a cradle woven from wind. Inside it, a single glowing seed pulsed in rhythm with my own heartbeat. The dream faded at dawn, but the feeling remained. I was being called to create, not simply shapes of light, but something lasting. My hands itched with the desire to weave not just stories, but sanctuary. I began that very morning. In a small hollow near the Whispering Brook, I pulled threads of morning light and laced them with song dust, shaping a glimmer nest in the low limbs of a yew tree. I did not fill it with spells or decorations. I left it open, unfinished. A place not to impress, but to welcome. Wordless invitations echoed through the grove. And slowly, others came. Not just Nera, but Eran with his whispering stones, Thala who danced with moths, even the shy barkling twins whose wings beat like falling leaves. Each added a piece, a woven ribbon, a songstone, a circle of moss that pulsed with warmth. The nest became something more. Not a building, not a shrine, but a meeting place of intention. And the forest watched. I could feel it in every trunk and tendril. The Glimmer Grove was listening not only to our power, but to our choices. One evening, Marilyn brought a stone. Small, grey, unremarkable. "Place this in the center," she said. "It is the heart of a story long past. Let it be touched by new dreams." I did. And that night, the glimmer nest glowed without threads. The glow came not from my weaving, nor Nera's shaping, but from the gathered presence of us all. Later, Nera came to me, her eyes clear. "Do you remember the lullaby the Hollow One hummed?" she asked. I nodded. She hummed it now, quietly, and as she did, the glow of the nest pulsed with its rhythm. We were not just learning magic anymore. We were learning how to remember. How to hold sorrow without breaking. How to honor what came before while daring to build something new. One morning, a small creature I had never seen before crept into the glimmer nest. It had bark for fur, and its eyes were like polished amber. It sniffed, looked around, then curled up and slept in the center. We all watched in silence. "It's a dreamling," Thala whispered. "They only appear where the forest feels safe." The glimmer grove was changing. And so were we. Not through command, not through test or trial, but through listening, through dreaming, through remembering. In my next weaving, I did not use light or memory. I used silence. I shaped a space in the air where no thread was spun, a hollow for stillness. It hovered for hours, and every bird that passed by flew gently around it, wings slowed in reverence. I understood, then, that not all magic was in what we added. Some magic lived in what we allowed to remain untouched. The rains returned in the middle of the green moon, soft and soaking, the kind that draped the grove in mist and sweet smells for days. We welcomed them. The air grew thicker, richer, and the moss on every branch turned lush. I found myself walking more than flying, toes enjoying the cool squish of damp loam. My wings, stronger now, hummed gently against my back, folding close to listen better. Rain was another kind of song, after all. A low rhythm of droplets tapping the canopy, trickling through leaves, pooling into secret echoes. During these quiet days, I heard something new. Not a voice, not a dream, but a sensation. A vibration, faint and constant, beneath the ground itself. It was as if the earth had begun to breathe differently. I asked Marilyn, and she said only, "There are layers deeper still. Places even we do not often go." She didn't warn me away, which I took as permission. So I began to follow the pulse. It started near the shimmerroots, winding plants that grew at the base of the hillshade trees. They only glowed during rain, and I sat near one until its light quivered with resonance. My magic reached out naturally, and a thread emerged, not from the sky or leaves, but from the soil itself, dull brown and steady. I took it in hand and followed where it tugged. The path led downward, deeper than I'd ever gone. Past the beetle beds and the burrows of stone dwellers, beyond the carved tunnels the barklings used to shelter in wind. The forest thinned here, not in presence, but in voice. There was no birdsong, no hum of bees, only the whisper of damp stone and root. After a time, I reached a place where the ceiling of earth opened into a dome of ancient hollow, a cavern shaped not by claw or magic, but by patient time. Faint green light pulsed from the walls, where veins of crystal twisted through the rock like frozen lightning. The air was thick with memory. I knelt and touched the floor. Images rushed in, faster than dreams, stronger than songs. I saw great roots descending from trees long gone, reaching deep in search of water that sang. I saw shadows slither through cracks, only to dissolve when touched by breath. I saw fairies here, long ago, sitting in circles, humming the deep rhythms of stone itself. Not weaving, not shaping, listening. A low voice, older than language, pressed gently into my mind. You've come far above your roots, but your wings are not your only tool. It was not threatening, not commanding, just truth. I stayed there, hours perhaps, absorbing the rhythm of the underground, learning its patience. The threads here did not shimmer. They pulsed. Their glow was a slow burn, their shape not lines but coils, like old ferns or sleeping serpents. When I finally stood to leave, a stone near the wall cracked gently open, and from it spilled a single, glowing seed. It hovered in front of me, heavy with promise. I caught it in both hands and felt its thrum settle into my chest. This was not for planting. This was a memory seed, a gift from the earth's own weave. I carried it gently all the way back, cradling it with reverence. Back in the grove, the forest had shifted again. Nira met me with wide eyes. "The canopy's grown thicker," she said, pointing upward, "and it had branches twisting together as if whispering secrets in a new language." Others had felt it too. Erun claimed the stones were singing at dusk. Thala had found moths clustering near forgotten shrines. Something was stirring in the weave, a deep note being plucked that resonated through every layer. I called a gathering. Not because I was told to, because it felt right. We met at the Glimmer Nest, each bringing something from our recent wanderings: seeds, stones, feathers, tears. I placed the memory seed in the center and wove around it a net of silence. Then I spoke. There is more beneath us than we've been told. Magic isn't just sky and shimmer, it's root and dust and weight. If we forget that, we rise too high. If we listen, we find balance. No one argued. Some nodded. Some touched the ground. Nira stepped forward and added a sprig of night fern, dark and ancient. "Let's build something that remembers both above and below," she said. And so we began the Hollow Heart Spiral. It wasn't a shrine. It wasn't a hall. It was a living braid of structure and memory, part grown, part woven, part shaped. It twisted up from the roots of a willing tree, spiraling outward in rings that bent with purpose. Each ring told a story. One of water, one of silence, one of fire, one of air, one of shadow. And each ring ended in an open step, so nothing was ever closed. We built it slowly, over many days, sometimes only adding a leaf or stone. The process mattered more than the pace. During this time, I found myself dreaming in threads. Not my own, but others. I would wake with songs in my head that no one else had heard, or memories that belonged to the wind. The Glimmer Grove was threading its dreams through me. I began keeping a small orb of woven glass, and each night I whispered the dreams into it. Not to keep them, but to let them breathe. And then, one twilight, the orb cracked, not from damage, but from fullness. Light spilled out, and in it, I saw something clear for the first time. A vision of the grove as it once was open, wild, pulsing with magic too vast for borders. But over it, a net had been draped, woven in fear, pulled tight by time. The net shimmered faintly, and I realized it was still there, unseen, but present. A barrier not of stone, but of silence. I shared the vision with the others. Some grew afraid. What if letting it go invites danger? Thala asked. Nira answered, what if holding it keeps healing away? We didn't come to a conclusion that night. But the seed of the thought had been planted. The Hollow Heart Spiral glowed brighter the next day, as if affirming our questions. We were close now to something. Some turn in the pattern, some change in the melody. And I understood then, to grow wings was not only to rise. It was also to reach down, to tether light to root, sky to stone, memory to now. Only then could the grove truly breathe again. A strange hush fell over the glimmer grove. Not sudden, not alarming, but creeping like fog. Birds still flew, but they didn't call. Leaves shifted, but without rustle. Even the streams seemed to slow, the water's song stilled as though something deep beneath the roots had paused to hold its breath. At first, we all assumed it was the cycle of the seasons beginning again. Sometimes the forest went quiet before great growth. Sometimes silence preceded bloom. But this stillness lingered. Too long. Too deep. I sat at the center of the hollow heart spiral, the memory seed cradled in a cradle of moss. The threads I pulled that morning refused to form. My weaving wouldn't hold, the light dull and slow. It was as if the air no longer carried music. Neera's shaping, too, had grown stubborn. Where her sprouts once erupted in spirals of joy, they now hesitated, twisting uncertainly in her palms. We exchanged worried glances, but no one said the words we were both thinking. Something was wrong with the weave. Marilyn noticed. Of course she did. She gathered us beneath the silver lily, her expression unreadable. Magic comes in tides, she said softly, but this is not ebb. This is fracture. The grove had grown too quiet. Not tired, but disconnected. She sent scouts to the corners of the Glimmer Grove, to the ancient caves, the dewroot plains, the forgotten thorn paths. All returned with the same message, fading. Not death. Not destruction. Just fading. It wasn't long before the dreams followed. My sleep was haunted now not by fear, but by the absence of it. I would drift into endless blank fields where nothing grew, where no sounds echoed, where not even memory remained. And worse still, I began to forget. Small things, at first, the name of a flower, a melody from my first weaving. Then more. I woke one morning unable to recall my mother tree's scent. My wings beat heavier, as though the air resisted me. Neera, too, changed. Her magic clung to her like vapor, reluctant to flow. The plants she shaped lost their luster within hours. The glimmer nest dimmed. Even the dreamlings vanished. The forest was not just holding its breath, it was drifting away. That's when we found the tear. Thala discovered it while chasing one of her moths to the border cliffs. A thin line in the sky, vertical, faintly shimmering like heat above stone. No sound. No wind. Just an emptiness that rippled outward, slow but constant. We gathered at its edge, watching. I stepped closer and felt my magic shiver. Not from danger, from grief. This, Erun said, crouching low, is not something that came to us. This is something that leaked from us. He placed a hand on the earth. We forgot something. Something important. And the forest has stopped remembering. Marilyn stood silent for a long time. Then she spoke. There is a story the Glimmergrove once told. Of a time when the weave was tangled not by harm, but by neglect. When the fair folk turned their songs inward, when dreams were held close instead of shared. And when they stopped remembering each other, the world forgot them too. The tear was a symptom, not a cause. The threads weren't broken. They were being unwound by time and disconnection. We had grown in magic, in strength, but slowly, unknowingly, we had begun to look inward. Our glimmer nest, our spiral, it all drew the weave into a tight coil. Beautiful, Yes, but isolated. It was Nira who stepped forward first. Then we must share again, she said. Not just with each other. With the whole forest. Every creature, every corner, every silence. We agreed. And so began the rethreading. We split into pairs, then scattered in spirals through the grove. Wherever we went, we offered magic not as control, but as gift. I sat with sleeping foxes, humming songs into their dreams. I visited old stones, leaving light and tears. I wove nothing for days, only watched, listened, and remembered. We told stories aloud, even when no one was near. We sang names into the soil, so even if we forgot, the dirt would remember. Nira planted seeds not to grow, but to remind. Small markers, each shaped like a moment she loved, a curl of wind, a laugh, a line of verse whispered at dusk. The more we gave, the more the silence thinned. And then came the first bird call, one note, pure, from the oldest owl. Then the leaves stirred. Then the hollow heart spiral lit from within, not from magic, but from memory. The memory seed pulsed once, and the sky rippled. The tear shimmered. And slowly, it began to close, not stitched, but soothed. Not repaired, but remembered. That night, I dreamed again, but not of blank fields. I walked through a forest alive with echo. I saw every moment I'd forgotten laid gently before me in feathers, petals, stones. And the wind sang my name not in warning, but in welcome. When I woke, Nira was beside me. She whispered, "The wind sings again." I nodded. And for the first time in many moons, I wept. We hadn't saved the grove. We had rejoined it, reoffered ourselves as threads in its song. And it, in turn, had begun to sing back. The forest woke slowly, like a dream remembered just in time. We had begun to feel its breath again, soft exhalations in the breeze, familiar rhythms in the water, faint laughter beneath the bark. Birds returned in small choirs. Flowers once dulled by silence began to blush again with dew-colored fire. But the most meaningful sign was not a sound or bloom, it was the return of the echoes. They came not as spirits or apparitions, but as moments that lingered too long to be mere memory. I found one near the whispering pool, a young fae, flickering faintly like a flame seen through fog, sitting at the edge of the water. When I approached, it did not turn, did not vanish. It remained, humming a tune I half knew. The moment I sat beside it and hummed the next line, it faded. Not into nothing, but into the water's reflection. The pool now sang that song every dusk, a hush in the ripples. Others found echoes too. Nira saw her shadow smile at her before she did. Thala followed a moth that circled in a perfect loop each dusk, always returning to the same petal. We realized the grove was remembering us as much as we remembered it. Not with precision, but with feeling. These echoes were not tricks or traps. They were the forest's way of anchoring memory into matter. But memory, like magic, is wild and doesn't always return gently. One dawn, as mist laced the branches and the hollow heart spiral glowed low with root light, the dreams changed. My sleep had grown clear again since the tear began to close, but that morning, I awoke with frost across my skin, not cold, but a mark left by dream. I had walked the grove as it burned, not in pain, but in purpose. Trees igniting not from flame but from stories too full to stay contained. Every bloom singing, every stone dancing, A memory of such beauty it frightened me. Not for what it showed, but for what it meant. What if we're not meant to preserve the grove? I asked Marilyn later. What if it wants to become something else? She did not speak for a long time. Finally, she said, then our task is to help it become. Not to hold it back with old songs. That changed everything. We had treated the Glimmer Grove as sacred, but also as still. We had assumed its beauty was in what had always been, not in what could be. But the echoes didn't repeat old steps. They danced new ones in familiar rhythms. And I realized the grove was evolving. And we had to evolve too. The spiral became our place of transformation. Nira began shaping forms we had never seen, plants that sang when touched, leaves that caught starlight and spun it into warmth. I wove not memories, but intentions, threads shaped like choices, anchored by dreams not yet dreamt. One night I crafted a bridge from threadless air that sang only when no one walked across it. Another day I built a spiral of mist that cooled the moment a lie passed through it. The grove responded. Each time we dared to push forward, to explore new truth, it grew more alive. But with growth came tension. Some among us feared the change. Aaron believed we were stepping outside our bounds. The forest is healing, he said. Why risk it again by pushing its shape? Others nodded. What if the echoes fade because we stop honoring them? It was not rebellion. It was caution, rooted in love. But I knew that caution, left unchecked, could become silence again. So I invited them to walk the spiral with me at dawn. We moved slowly, each step accompanied by a thread I wove as we went, light and memory, song and stillness. At the center, I held up a single stone, one I'd kept since the first time I entered the deep hollow. This is not just a rock, I said. It is every touch, every story, every whisper it has absorbed. It has become more than it was by remembering. So must we. Nira added her voice. The forest doesn't want to be what it was. It wants to remember how to become again. Not despite us, but through us. There was no agreement that day. But something softened. The spiral hummed louder. And that evening, a new bloom unfurled near its base, a vine none of us had ever seen, with petals shaped like spiral stairs. We called it the Echo Vine. That night, I dreamed of the grove standing on a cliff, wings unfurled. The wings were ours. The cliff was change. The wind whispered not to leap, not to fear, but to trust. I woke smiling. The wind changed again, not in warning this time, but in welcome. It came softer, fuller, layered with notes that hadn't been heard in seasons. Some were new, sharp and curling like laughter made of bells. Others were old, buried beneath the bark of memory, singing in pulses too deep for ears, felt instead in bones and branches. The Glimmer Grove was speaking again, not as it had before, but in a new voice built from the many threads we had offered back. It was time, Marilyn told us, for the naming. Every fairy, when grown, earns their second name. The first is given at bloom, a name to guide you. The second is one you choose, not as a mask but as a mirror. Not a reward, but a recognition. The grove does not give it. You find it, or it finds you. And once spoken aloud beneath the twin oaks, the grove remembers it forever. We had heard of this ritual all our lives, though it had not been performed in full for many seasons. The tear had changed that. We were the first to step forward again. Nira and I spent 3 days in solitude, as tradition required, wandering opposite edges of the grove with no tools, no threads, no flight. Just our steps, our silence, and the rhythm of the forest. I walked west, toward the mossed cliffs where the stones sang to the wind. I sat at their edge and listened for hours. I saw shadows pass, clouds shift, petals open and close. I said nothing, not even to myself. On the second day, I dreamed under a dewdrift tree. In the dream, I floated above the forest as a thread of light. I looked down, expecting to see paths or towers, but instead, I saw loops. Spirals. Every action I had ever taken curling back not in circles, but in growing rings, like the memory of a pond learning to ripple. I followed the largest of these spirals until I reached its center. There, in the stillness, I heard my second name. Not from a voice, not from wind, from the place in me that never needed to ask. When I returned, I carved it into a leaf and placed it in the center of the hollow heart spiral. Nira met me there, her eyes aglow. She said she, too, had found her name in a grove of mirror-shade trees. She had looked into each one, and every reflection had been a different version of herself, child, elder, shadow, fire. But in the last, there had been no face, just a shape made of golden flame, gently dancing. It wasn't me, she whispered, and yet I felt known. That's how I knew. The twin oaks stood waiting at the heart of the grove. Their bark had silvered with age, their branches woven together so tightly they seemed to breathe as one. We gathered there, not in ceremony, but in presence. The forest was our witness. Marilyn stepped aside and let us pass beneath the arch of branches. The air shimmered. I felt every echo I had ever touched brushing against me, each one a question, a promise, a door. I turned, took Nira's hand, and together we spoke. I am Thistle, I said. Thread of becoming. Memory in motion. I am Kaylee, Nira said. Flame of listening. Shape of change. The grove did not answer in words. It answered in bloom. The ground beneath us lit with hundreds of tiny flowers, each one different. Not summoned. Not planted. Remembered. The Glimmer Grove accepted our names. That night, no one spoke loudly. We sat beneath the twin oaks, a silent celebration woven in light and breath and pulse. The spiral pulsed gently. The glimmer nest glowed from within. Later, Marilyn placed a hand on my shoulder. You've named your wings now, she said. But there's more. The naming is not the end. It's the beginning of stewardship. I knew what she meant. The forest did not keep itself. It invited caretakers, not rulers, not defenders, listeners, anchors. Those who could hear both what had been and what might be. I was ready. Or, I told myself I was. But becoming a steward meant turning your gaze beyond your own branch. You had to see the full canopy and the shadows beneath. That shadow returned before dawn. A silence, too perfect. A stillness, too precise. And beneath the spiral, the memory seed began to flicker. Kaylee, Nira, stood beside me. It's not done, she said. The wound we touched before, it was only one of many. There are others, farther, older, deeper. I nodded. And they're waking. She looked at me, her face calm, her wings tucked close. Then we must go beyond the Glimmer Grove. It was forbidden, but also inevitable. Wings, once named, are meant to fly. We left at dawn, not as rebels, not as heroes, but as extensions of the forest itself. The Glimmer Grove did not stop us. It gave no warning, offered no parting omen. It simply opened a path through its thickest trees, one that had not been there the night before, a tunnel of stillness lit by faint pulses in the bark. Each step we took felt both like farewell and continuation. Beneath us, the moss thickened, as if cushioning our feet for the weight of what lay ahead. We flew only when needed. Mostly, we walked, listening. The air beyond the grove was thinner, not in breath, but in song. The threads were here, faint, frayed, buried. But they did not sing freely. It was like walking through an echo that no longer remembered its origin. Trees stood further apart, their roots tighter, as if clutching the soil in fear. After 2 days, we reached a clearing choked by silence. No birds, no wind, no insects. At its center stood a monolith, black stone, jagged and broken across the top. Around it, petrified stumps, hollowed by time and fire. But what chilled me most was the sensation in my chest, recognition. The monolith thrummed with a forgotten thread, the same tone I'd heard from the memory seed beneath the spiral. Kaylee stepped forward and placed her hand upon the stone. Her magic recoiled, then returned, drawn in. This place, she whispered, was once a grove too. We pieced it together slowly, through traces in bark, buried glyphs, faint echoes left in roots. A sister grove, long lost, cut off from the weave not by fire or battle, but by choice. Its keepers, once proud, had sealed themselves away from change, fearful of the chaos beyond their canopy. Without growth, they faded. Without remembering, they turned to stone. And when their magic tried to preserve what could not remain, it cracked. I felt the memory calling not to be mourned, but to be carried. This place did not want to return. It wanted to rest. We lit no fire. We wove no threads. We simply sat and listened. Kaylee spoke stories into the earth. Not grand tales, but small ones, the laugh of a moth, the curve of a vine, the song of a first name spoken aloud. I added silence, shaped gently into rings that pulsed outward, slow and steady. And the monolith cracked, not in collapse, but in relief. Light spilled from it. Not bright, not searing, soft, like dawn under leaves. It flowed over the ground, curled around the stumps, and seeped into the soil. A warmth returned. The sky stirred. Somewhere far above, a bird called. We had not restored the lost grove. We had given it permission to sleep. When we returned to the Glimmer Grove, the path closed behind us, not in finality, but in peace. And the memory seed beneath the spiral had changed. It no longer pulsed. It beat like a heart. The others felt it too. The grove had accepted the lost into itself, not by reclaiming, but by remembering. From then on, the spiral grew slowly, unpredictably, curving in new directions with each season. Sometimes branches appeared overnight. Sometimes petals opened in midwinter. We did not question it. We did not command it. We learned to steward not with certainty, but with wonder. I became known not as a weaver, but as a thread-bearer, one who walks the forest with empty hands, waiting to catch what needs holding. Kaylee became Fire Guide, a name she never chose, but one that followed her everywhere, whispered by leaves and echoed in roots. Together we taught others not just spells, but silences. Not just shaping, but stillness. Years passed. Dreamlings returned. New saplings bloomed in places they never had. The wind developed a new chord, and some nights, beneath the twin oaks, echoes gathered again. Not faint, not fading, alive. And when I finally stood at the edge of the grove one last time, wings stretched, air trembling with all I had become, I did not look back. Because the grove flew with me now. Rooted not in place, but in memory, in motion, in becoming. And so I flew, not upward, but inward, through the canopy of time, through the sky beneath the roots. Still a child of the glimmer grove, still listening, always becoming. Thank you for listening to this light story. If you enjoyed this lovely tale, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Light Story Club will be here for when you want to listen to another chronicle to help you rest. Goodbye for now.